It's exciting to sit with you here, William. I did notice that one of your customers at Truera is NVIDIA. And we had an amazing conversation with Azita earlier today. And throughout the thread of every conversation that we've been having has been this idea of, yes, like generative AI immersion, and these tools are going to make for this amazing and stellar new shopping experience or overall commerce experience. However, how do we do this responsibly? So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Truera and kind of the origin story.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think I should update my LinkedIn a little bit because we have now evolved since the beginning. And so what we're doing, we call full life cycle AI observability. Mm-hmm. And we do it for people that are building AI applications that are either kind of predictive or discriminative, as well as now generative. Mm-hmm. And essentially what that means is we help people monitor, test, debug their AI applications so that they continuously improve the quality and performance of those applications.
That's pretty fascinating.
And by the way, quality and performance is a big challenge in generative AI and large language models.
So let's talk about quality. Let's talk about relevance. Let's talk about hallucination. And obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about that. There's some in the market who would argue like, oh, well, this is early days, it's going to get better. There's some who are arguing this is a persistent issue that will be difficult to eradicate based on how these models perform and how they work and what they're trained on. And then, of course, there's many different organizations out there who are investing, maybe even in proprietary models. And I'm curious your point of view on what is kind of at the root of some of those challenges and how organizations can attack them.
Yeah. Well, I think at the root of it, and my co-founder Anupam and my other co-founder Shaq have great talks on this, but part of the root of it is for a very long time, data scientists have been working on trying to make more general models. Mm-hmm. So they've been trying to improve the generalization of models and reduce the memorization of models. And that is what gives some of these large language models this incredible creative element to it. But when you're using applications where actually memorization is better, that's what gives it this hallucination kind of challenge. And so it's this trade-off between generalization and memorization, which has been kind of historically through data science. And that's, in some ways, these models were designed to hallucinate a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the root of it. Now, these are technical problems like other technical problems. They're going to get solved when smart people go and focus on them. And people are already doing a number of things to do that with large language models. One of the main things they do is called retrieval augmented generation, which is where instead of just saying, well, answer based on all your information from the internet, we're going to give you, constrain it. Here's the content that we have retrieved that we believe is relevant to this, that you should then summarize and provide back into your answer. So when people are doing chatbots for technical documentation, or a lot of enterprises are going to adopt this retrieval augmented generation or RAG architecture. Mm-hmm. And that helps a lot. But inherently, because these models have been trained to generalize, hallucinations can still very much happen. If you were to ask large language models who founded Truera, as my co-founder mentioned, it gets one of my co-founders and then completely doesn't get
You're
the
written
other
out
two.
of the script?
Written out of the script, yeah. I won't name the large language model that did that. But this is normal, and this will happen. And so one of the things we are doing, we believe one of the way to solve this is actually to use AI to evaluate AI. Right now, when people are building these RAG-based architecture or RAG-based applications, they're doing it by hand. That's the retrieval augmented generation, RAG. Okay. They're doing the testing and evaluation by hand. They're doing a question, getting an answer,
which is
or
very
doing a summary. Very laborious, right? And you're obviously not going to capture all the failure scenarios. So you have to make it programmatic in order to move this forward. We believe the way to make it programmatic is to use other machine learning models in order to do that. So, for example, we have created a model, just to back up a second, we built this into an open source software called TrueLens. And TrueLens captures all those tests and experiments and then allows you to use what we call feedback functions in order to run these programmatic evaluations. So you can say, is there toxic content? Is there a language mismatch? The question was in German, but you got the answer back in English. Is the answer grounded in the information that you gave it based on your retrieval? And that's one of the key things we've added recently. And what that essentially does is it measures how well the answer is supported by that content that you've given it in that retrieval augmented generation kind of capability. And so ultimately, over time, we believe that specific models or AI applications are going to be built in order to provide this quality control for the large language model based applications.
So that's really interesting, and I agree with you. I'm in the camp that these are problems that will get solved.
Yeah.
I think competitive differentiation is a really interesting, and you talked about, sort of segregating and constraining the data set that's being used. I'm kind of curious in your point of view around, in a sense, using commercially available large language model services versus organizations maybe investing or trying to do something unique. I think we're seeing a little bit of both in the marketplace right now. Certainly larger organizations are hiring consultancies that are actually growing their practices very rapidly to try to support this.
Yeah.
I have my questions as whether that's really a smart move.
Yeah.
But as you look at the landscape today, and how do you think organizations should be thinking about leveraging sort of what's available, and or commercial applications that might be vertical specific, like Bloomreach, for example, and many others, or building? How do you look at that from your vantage point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does create a little bit of challenge if everybody uses public large language models. What is your source of competitive advantage? I think that fundamentally it's going to be the same as what has historically been a source of competitive advantages, which is understanding your customers and building the application that best going to meet their needs, which you can do even with these public models. Now, there is an option to also go create your own with some of the open source large language models, but that will be very costly, and not a lot of people will be able to do that. Yeah, and you'll. I think one big question is, how much is like the large language model is going to be, we'll see the same dynamics as like Google search, where basically they got the most data, they created generally the best search engine. And is that the same case here, that this will always be better? Or can you get good enough with your own large language models or by managing
or
them?
differentiate it somehow.
So I think we'll see how that plays out. That's going to be very interesting. But I do think that when you build these applications, especially when you're using this retrieval augmented generative architecture, there is a huge opportunity to build competitive advantage, which is really about this iteration cycle on how you get to the quality levels. I think Bloomreach is a perfect example of that, where they're going to be able to do this because they work with so many other retailers. They have a large amount of data, and they can iteratively iteratively get this better and better and better and better. And they'll be kind of leveraging the data from a large number of folks. An individual company or retailer could also do something similar, but there probably are some advantages with somebody who has access to a large amount of data. But it's really what I've always found with machine learning, because I've been working it for a very long time, starting at Bloomreach, was it's really about the number of iterations you get through. Every iteration you can only incrementally improve to a certain degree. That's kind of the nature of the beast. But if you can get lots and lots of iterations, it becomes multiplicative, right? In terms of like how you can get a little bit of advantage on a little bit of advantage, a little bit of advantage, a little bit of advantage. So I think for us, that's part of the reason I started Truera, was to enable teams to get fast iterations by giving them tools that make them more efficient and giving them ability to figure out what's the best hypothesis to go improve a model, run it, test it, and rinse and repeat. And so that, I think, it's the iterations and how early you get started. It really comes into that.
Yeah, at what point as companies are thinking about integrating generative AI or whatever the model is going to be, at what point would they engage a company like Truera? Are we talking very, very early and there's more advantage there? And as you spoke to, just competitive advantage, or if they have been testing and kind of running these tools, even just in the last year, is there still some advantage to integrating or working with like an advisory and monitoring tool like Truera?
Yeah, I think, obviously selfishly, the earlier the better, but I think that it is, and people can start with this open source package called TrueLens, and that essentially is a tool set for running these experiments and leveraging these feedback functions to do it programmatically so that you can speed it up. So we would say, start from the very beginning of doing your first prototype. We obviously we're very happy to work with people. We're seeing the community actually contribute and improve the software. We're kind of building in the open and improving with the people who are using it and collaborating and our customers on this. And I think, I would say every company that believes that generative AI, I think you need to do an assessment and say, is generative AI going to be important to our business? If it is going to be important to your business, you should get started as soon as possible. Start small, start internal, like Ali earlier was mentioning, and then iteratively improve and view it as a journey, and can make it a continued investment, but also be smart about, getting things into production. Sometimes too many things stay in kind of development mode and prototype mode. And I think people need to push it to get something in production so that you'll learn something different when it's live and in production than if it's still in the lab.
So you raised an interesting question there, which, in my mind, it's hard to imagine very many businesses or organizations that are not going to benefit from generative AI. Now, the question is, do they need something really actually proprietary in order to gain benefit? So it gets back to that differentiation question. But I am interested, you asked that rhetorical question, but what's your point of view? Because you're working so closely with so many different organizations, would you say, yeah, almost every organization right now should start testing, getting familiar, thinking about use cases, understanding, how their customers or users or employees or partners, et cetera, need to be, kind of factored into this? Well, how do you see that question?
I think that there are many companies where this will be critically important. I also think that there's a little bit of hype going on where there are some other companies where actually predictive AI or discriminative AI is likely more important for them.
So AI in general.
AI in general is going to transform every business.
Yes.
I can't imagine a business that can't be transformed and where AI ultimately will be a critical success factor. But generative AI has certain applications that are very, very powerful, but not all businesses it's fundamental to. There are other things. If you take a bank, for example, a commercial bank, what's fundamental to them is lending, right? And credit assessment and
risk assessment
and those kinds of things. Generative AI can be useful from a customer service perspective and those kinds of things and an operational perspective, but their core business is that. And the traditional, other AI is used for that. Non-generative AI is used for that. So they should be investing in that heavily.
Now, if everyone has AI, is it just a sort of rising of all the boats and everyone sort of remaining on the sort of relative equal competitive landscape because they're all using AI? Or do you really think this is a dramatic differentiator over the next 10, 20 years?
I think it can be a dramatic differentiator because I've just seen the power of those iterations. If you iterate a lot, you can make a much better application than people that don't. And I think that will come through. So maybe not in every case. There may be cases where good enough.
Complete generalization, but yeah.
Right, but good enough. But I think in many cases you can continuously get it better, and that will ultimately, if AI is transforming a core part of your business, I think that will be a big competitive advantage, because it's not like you can suddenly decide, okay, we weren't working on AI and now we're going to work in AI. I've made a CEO decision and now working on AI, and I expect our AI to be as good as our competitors be doing it 5 years. That doesn't work. Because it's about incremental and iterative improvement. So you're 5 years behind, you can't ever change that. Now, maybe there are leapfrog technology, never say never in that you couldn't leapfrog in some way, but fundamentally you are 5 years behind if you're going to use the same technology as they are, right? And then it's hard to catch up. So I think that people should start early, continuously invest, and just speed up these iterations as much as possible.
Very interesting. Very interesting time.
It is a very interesting time. I think we're also going to see, a bit of there's be some backlash at some point, right? There's a hype cycle, right?
We're already seeing it. This has been an incredibly fast hype cycle in some ways, right? We're not even a year into this, and we already see some backlash and some pushback and a media narrative as well, and some very thoughtful, I should say, writing about whether or not this is actually going to live up to this transformative hype. But I tend to lean in the same direction you do. I think this is actually but as with anything, it's going to take maybe more time than we might initially believe for some of this impact to be felt.
And one interesting other thing on the horizon is that the EU may pass the Artificial Intelligence Act this year. If that passes, that's going to be a whole new chapter in AI and society.
Absolutely. So great to see you again and spend time with you. Thanks for being with us here today.
Wonderful. Enjoyed it.
It's great to meet you.
Thank you.